Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Ecclesiastes study for the final day. We are in chapter 12 today, wrapping up the book, and we're going to see how Solomon wraps up the conclusion of all of this vanity that he's been talking about. Will we have a somewhat optimistic ending, or will it be, more of the depressing same? That's the question. If you would like our PDF, you can download it at tobelikechrist.com for free. And our first page, of course, is our short chapter summaries, which now are totally complete, so you can take a closer look at those if you would like. Let's go ahead now and go over to page number 2 and get into our breakdown of the chapter. I've got 2 sections today, and the first one is going to be verses 1 through 8. I think the chapter breaks down pretty naturally. This first section is going to be titled Remembering God in the Youthful Days. Now, it's important to keep in mind what we just discussed at the end of chapter 11, because it really flows right into this. At the end of chapter 11, Solomon was talking about the days of youth. And here, he's also talking about the days of youth. So it's always good to remember that the chapter breaks weren't put in there by the original authors. They were put in later. And sometimes maybe they're not in the best spots. Not saying I could do better, but every once in a while you catch one that's like, I think maybe you should have moved that one a couple verses this way or that way. I think maybe for this chapter I probably would have moved it. So he's following up on that discussion of youth. And Solomon instructed people to remember God in their youthful days before the hardships of old age set in on them. And the following section through verses 8, I think, is a poetic description of some of those difficulties of old age. So Solomon talks about the stars and the moon being darkened, and those who look through the windows are dimmed. What's he talking about there? Can you think about how that might relate to old age? Your eyesight's getting bad, the sun is darkened, light is not as bright as it used to be. You're looking out the window, but you can't see as much. Probably your eyesight getting worse as you get older. The keepers of the house tremble, probably talking about your hands and your arms used to be really strong and able to protect you from a lot of things. Not as much when you're older. They get weaker, maybe a little less coordinated. The strong men are bent. Most people think that refers to your legs. Your legs when you're young, strong, stable. They hold you up. They catch you when you're about to fall. When you get older, not as much. They bend and they're weary and they start to lag a little bit. The grinders cease because they are few. The sound of the grinders is low. What part of your body is a grinder? Your teeth, right? Literally grinding food. And especially back in these older days when dental care wasn't quite as good, people's teeth used to start to fall out as they got older. It says that one rises at the sound of a bird. You don't sleep as deeply when you're older as when you're younger. Everything wakes you up, just like a little bird chirping outside of your window. The daughters of song are brought low, the next thing that he mentions. The enjoyment of music and pleasant sounds, it's not as enjoyable because your hearing isn't as good, right? Fear of what is high and terrors in the way. Falling is a lot more, it's more dangerous and there's a greater fear of it when you're old than when you're young. When you're young, you fall and you bounce back up and you go about your business. When you're old, you fall and you might break something. And there's a lot more things that are threatening to you because you're not as strong, because you're more fragile in old age. The almond tree blossoms. I think this one's a little bit trickier. I think my suspicion is that this refers to gray hair. Almond trees blossom and the flowers are white. So my thought is that, you get older and white hair starts to blossom on your head. I've already got some in my beard. Not on my head yet, but definitely in my beard. The grasshopper drags itself along is the next thing that Solomon mentions. And I think the idea here is that there was, grasshoppers are quick, they're agile, they're jumping around all over the place. They're hard to catch. But when you're older, not so much. A once quick and agile creature now starts to get sluggish. And desire fails. I think this could refer to either hunger or maybe to sexual desire as you get older. So Solomon advises his readers to remember God while they are young, because it wouldn't be long before they were back in the dust from which God made them. And he says this, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. He repeats that in verse 8, and that's going to be the last time that we hear it in this book. It's not going to be part of his conclusion, and I think that is significant. Solomon does state that the spirit, quote, returns to God. So there's a recognition that a man's spirit goes back to God. What exactly does he mean by that? He doesn't elaborate any further on his view of life after death. Now let's go down to section number 2, which is verses 9 through 14, and finish it out. And this really is kind of the wrap up to the book. And I've entitled this section, Fear God and Keep His Commandments. The narrator of Ecclesiastes tells the reader that Solomon, or the preacher, taught knowledge to all the people through Proverbs. He says this, quote, "The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth," in verse 10. So after all of his experimenting, trying to find meaning and significance in life, Solomon's final conclusion in the book of Ecclesiastes are these famous words. I'll just read you verse 14. Quote, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man," or this is the whole of man. "For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." And that is how the book ends. So rather than elaborating on that right now, let's go ahead into our application section where we will talk about it further. So after testing the world's offerings, Solomon concluded that humans can find significance, purpose, and meaning only in giving themselves entirely to God and in keeping his commandments. You know, the creation that God has made, it has a lot of things to offer, has a diverse number of options for our enjoyment. But those things will never give our life meaning if those are our primary pursuit. If we pursue the things of creation, but we do not pursue the Creator, our lives indeed will be a vain pursuit. Furthermore, the world is full of many things that we don't understand and will never be able to understand. Solomon talks about this all throughout the book. He says there's all these things that don't make sense to me. It all just seems like vanity. There's things humans aren't going to be able to understand because this world wasn't created by a simple mind like ours, but by an incredible mind like God's. We shouldn't expect to understand everything. The world is full of many things that we can't control, and we can never even come close to grasping the mystery that's involved in those things. The randomness and seeming vanity of the world is only controlled and fully understood by God. The human mind is incapable of grasping its complexity, and we have the tendency to label what we can't explain and what we don't understand as nonsensical, as vanity. And I think that's the perspective that Solomon is writing from, that human perspective in most of this book. He's saying from a human perspective, I can't make sense of all of this. That doesn't mean that God can't. Our responsibility isn't to understand, it's to follow God's commands as part of his world. Though life may seem unjust, though our daily work may seem inconsequential, though the world may seem like an endless cycle of repetition, we can know that God understands why it all exists and the purpose of it all. And he will account for every detail on his scales of justice when he deems the time appropriate. And that really is Solomon's final conclusion and his, I think, encouragement to everyone who is living in this world that sometimes seems to the human mind to be vanity. So as we finish up Ecclesiastes, some people look at the ending and they say, well, that's just as depressing as the rest of the book. Solomon's basically saying, look, the grave is the end, and so just keep God's commandments. That's all that you can do, and when you go to the grave, that's the end of you, and that wraps it up. I don't think that that's really the conclusion of Ecclesiastes based on the final statement that Solomon makes. Seems like his statement demands that we believe that he had some kind of an idea, some kind of a concept in his mind, some kind of a belief in his mind that there was something after the grave, that the grave wasn't the end. And we see that in his statement, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether it's good or evil. Every single detail, every single thing that we thought was vain, every single wrong that was ever done, every good deed that was ever done, that's going to be accounted for and accordingly rewarded or punished by God in the end. Now, is that just talking about on earth? God will dole out justice for all actions on earth? It can't be. And Solomon has already pointed this out, that many times on earth, the righteous get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked get what the righteous deserve. And there's a lot of times people do evil things and they never get punished for it. And he talked about that guy, that wicked guy who died in the city, but his wickedness wasn't publicly known. And so everyone celebrated him as if he was some, incredible guy because all of his sins were hidden. So Solomon doesn't believe that God's going to dole out justice on this side of the grave, in life on earth. So this seems to indicate that he does believe that there is an accounting of souls after death. And so he's talked about how from the human perspective, everything just ends in the grave. But he's tipped off to more, that God is doing something after the grave, and that people will truly get what they deserve, and all actions will be accounted for, and that all of the things that we thought were vanity, that were actually part of God's world, are brought into the accounting to ensure that in the end justice is given to all, that every good deed is rewarded, every bad deed is punished. And again, this has to happen after death because we know that it doesn't always happen on the earth. So Solomon is indicating people here as we close the book that while your human perspective may lead you to believe that life is vanity and that all ends in the grave, there is more. And he doesn't give us a robust description of life after death or heaven and hell or some of the things that we get moving on into the New Testament. And, now we know more about what's coming and how God will judge the world and the eternal destiny of souls. How much Solomon knew about that, we're not sure, but he's indicating to his audience that you may not understand the world. From a human perspective, it may look all like vanity to you, but it's not all vanity. God has it under control. He understands why it all exists. Your responsibility is to exist in his world, to fear him, to respect him, and to do as he instructs. And you can be guaranteed, if nothing else, that God will bring everything into judgment in the end. So live with that future event in the forefronts of your mind. Okay, well, that is my summary of the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me know if you have any other thoughts, or maybe you are subscribed to the kind of more depressing ending to Ecclesiastes. Let me know why you prefer that view over this one. Or maybe you have a different take or some more applications, or just want to write down some lessons that you've learned from the book of Ecclesiastes as a whole. Feel free to leave those down in the comment section. Our next book is, of course, going to be the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. And I think that one's not going to take us a whole lot of time to get through. There's just not that many chapters. It is a interesting book, definitely unique in the canon, in the biblical text. So it won't take us too long to get through it. Now, I don't know if I'm going to have the first video out tomorrow, but I will have it out at least this week. So watch out for that. I may want a little bit more prep time to get that one ready and rolling. So watch out for that this week. And thanks for joining me for the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you want, of course, now all of our PDFs are out online. You can go download the entire book. I hope you guys have a fantastic day.